Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/Markets Plus for more episodes. The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Next Gen Treasury. My name is Johanna Skoog, and I'm the Managing Director and Head of TPS INCB with BMO in the U.S. For those of you who are new to our quarterly Next Gen series, our aim is to provide great content and ideas on topics that are timely and relevant to Treasury and finance professionals. Next Gen Treasury also provides the opportunity to receive CTP credits for attending each educational session. To date, we've covered topics ranging from liquidity and cash management to economic outlooks and cyber fraud. Today, my colleagues will be discussing another hot topic on everyone's mind, artificial intelligence. Let's begin.
Thanks, Johanna. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Sean Ellery, Head of Digital Innovation, BMO Commercial Banking. My teams and I are always looking for opportunities to use open banking, AI, and other emerging technologies to solve complex customer challenges, to drive BMO's digital-first strategy forward. After all, there's a lot of noise around AI. Is it going to save the world, or is it going to become self-aware, become the Terminator, and destroy society? Most of us understand that AI has enormous potential to benefit our companies, and we like to understand how best to harness this technology, where to implement it, and where to see the most impact. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll start by defining what AI is and what it isn't. We'll examine how AI is currently being used and how to determine where it fits in your business. Finally, we'll discuss how best to implement AI to ensure both short and long-term success. To help us out, we're joined by two of my colleagues, both experts in this space. Mark Pfeiffer heads the data science and AI practice at BMO in commercial banking. He's responsible for the development and implementation of AI-driven solutions that optimize risk management strategies and drive financial growth. Paul O'Donovan is head of data analytics and AI risk management at BMO. Paul leads the team responsible for enterprise risk management programs for data analytics. Most recently, he led programs focusing on enterprise policy frameworks, emerging risks, and complex transformation. It's great to have you both here today. Let's start by defining our terms. Paul, we're talking about AI. What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And AI, even though it's only two letters, really kind of covers a broad spectrum of advanced modeling techniques that people can use to gain insight and information from large quantities of data. Really, in its simplest terms, the way we think about it here is different ways in which data can be processed to help replace or inform human decision-making and human inference. AI by itself as a concept is not new. The term was first coined back in the 50s, but really what we've seen over the course of the past decade or so is a lot of advancement in technological capability, computational capability, and a lot of focus, particularly in generative AI recently in the last 12 to 18 months, that's really kind of invigorating some of what you're hearing today in terms of the attention and focus on AI and the different ways in which it can be helpful to drive growth and revenue opportunities across different types of businesses.
Paul, what are the different types of AI and what capabilities do they have?
So I think, again, there's a spectrum here, and on the lower end of that and on the kind of less complex end and more traditional modeling capability, we really see some of those traditional machine learning methods, things that have been around for a long time, used to do things like predict fraud, identify creditworthiness, or assign credit scores to different customers. So really kind of some of your typical usages of classical modeling capabilities that have been around banks and other businesses for a long time. More recently, I think some of the more complicated and involved applications that we've seen, such as deep learning and things like neural networks, really are focusing on trying to find hidden and complicated patterns within the data itself and to draw more insightful information and predictions from these types of models. And so we've seen a little bit of a pivot from traditional machine learning to kind of deep learning and different, more complicated algorithms. I think more recently, though, a lot of the focus has been on generative AI, and particularly on some of the capabilities we see around natural language processing, some predictions and generation of content, specifically, be that through text, through image, through video, and really seeing that kind of permeate in a lot of different places.
Thanks, Paul. So let's shift to a business perspective. How are different industries using AI to optimize processes or solve challenges? How are they putting it to work for them?
Thanks, Sean. And maybe I'll start by saying AI as a tool is although we hear about it a lot, companies haven't integrated it to a great effect. I think only about 5% as a February poll of American companies had actually implemented AI. And that varies by industry, of course. Technology industry companies in the 20-ish type percent, manufacturing down to 3%. So you really see a lot of variability, and it tends to be focused in the larger companies as today, which is changing as AI as a service becomes more amenable. But the way these companies are using it, I'll broadly put those into two buckets. Providing actual insights is the first one, helping to make better decisions, understand those patterns that you're seeing in the data more quicker, more detailed, more nuanced, and getting those insights out to management or in the hands of customers in terms of recommendation systems and things of that nature, help spot trends, that sort of thing. The other area that you see this happening a lot is enabling key and differentiating functions. So as you think about companies that typically operate like a manufacturing type setup, they're using that to actually help redefine some of those core business functions to create competitive advantage. Can they be logistically more efficient, just in time, inventory coming in, that sort of thing that really helps them create some advantage, both financially and just operationally being more efficient. And so we're seeing that a lot. Customer service, I would say, chatbots, we're seeing that kind of change in how we're serving our customers from a supply chain management. As I mentioned, optimizing those logistics, enabling more efficient inventory management, delivering faster, better cost control, that sort of thing. So those are probably the two broad areas that I see it in.
And Paul, to add any additional comments?
Sure. Yeah. I would say maybe in the more recent kind of applications of generative AI specifically, in addition to what Mark just said, really where we're seeing that at the moment is more kind of on the productivity and efficiency lens of things. I think the key question that is still kind of out there in terms of the ultimate utility and value realization from a generative AI perspective is once these tools are in place and these efficiency gains start to get realized, how do you actually turn that into kind of hard dollars and cents in terms of an impact to your bottom line? And so there's a lot of investment, a lot of, I think, investigation and proofing out of these different types of tools. And I think we'll start to see kind of some of that morph into, once those efficiencies and productivity gains are there, how they're realized will kind of be the next way that we start to see some of that take shape.
That's awesome. Thanks for framing that. There's a lot of possibilities, clearly. But what about the limitations of AI? Are there areas where we should not use it, or at least use it with a few caveats or guardrails?
In certain cases where you've got sensitive business processes, dealing with sensitive information, have critical decisions to make, it is really critical that AI is seen as an enabler in the decision-making process and not the ultimate deciding factor at this point. I think all of the things that Mark mentioned around data, explainability, over-reliance are really important to highlight this concept of maintaining a human in the loop or having a person interact with that ultimately for decision-making when it makes sense to do so where you've got certain types of processes in place. I think that's really, really critical point. Ethics and bias is one that's really topical right now within our industry, and I think across others, this concept of ethical use or responsible use of AI, I think, is really, really important. These are really complex systems that have a lot of kind of black box elements to them, and so understanding how your data is moving in, how it's moving within the system, how you're making sure that it's not treating customers or employees in different ways across different protected classes is really, really critical. So again, the ways in which it's being used is really important here. And then the final point I would make is just around regulatory and compliance. We're seeing more and more evolve globally and specifically within the US, even at the state level at the moment, in terms of the regulatory and legislative expectations around how companies can safely deploy AI and the protections that need to be in place for consumers. And so the regulatory and compliance angle here is very, very important. It's a space that's evolving really, really rapidly. The EU AI Act was kind of the first major landmark law that we saw come through, but we're starting to see more and more from a North American perspective as well. And so, again, that will be a key space to focus on in terms of the ethical and appropriate risk-based use of AI, but also where prohibitions may be in place from a legislative perspective.
These are really great points to consider. Thanks for sharing them. With all that in mind, though, what's the best way to determine how AI might benefit a business? Let me hand it over to Mark to start.
I think most of the time we approach this almost like any other initiative. As we think about technology or building a process or outsourcing or any of those other types of things that we consider, AI is actually not that different at the end of the day. We look typically to see where we can save some costs. What's our biggest cost driver? Is there possibility of applying AI to that? Where is there risk in our business, or where are there revenue opportunities? I see some models where it's specifically customer experience and employee experience are called out as differentiating factors to consider. But once you look at through those types of dimensions, you can start to hone in on the areas of your business where you're ultimately bearing those costs or you've got some potential to grow. And that's really where you focus on. And so I'd call that the demand side, where we think about where is there a need for it. And then on the more supply side, I'll call it like the build and what do you actually need to get there. And back to the ROI point that we've mentioned earlier, you really need to prioritize based on that complexity of implementation, the cost of that implementation. What does it mean? How disruptive is it going to be to your business, to your employees, to your clients, versus the benefit that you're going to get out of it. And there's a fine line there, I think, where you can over-index a little bit on implementing an AI. And you really need to make sure that that implementation is going to be how you envision it and at the cost and the risk that you're comfortable with. And part of that really is involving your stakeholders early and getting that buy-in and making sure folks understand what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it. As we've talked about the different areas that this can impact and think about the human resources impact, technology impact, legal impact, risk impact, there's really a lot of parts of the organization that can get impacted here. And so ensuring that you have that buy-in early on and understand how your build of AI is going to implement and integrate with that is going to be a critical factor.
Awesome. That's great. Paul, what do you think?
No, I think those are all really good points. I think, I would probably add to, as we look at AI and I think in general, as different businesses are looking at it, it's important to consider that AI can be an effective enabler of your strategy. It is not by itself the outcome to strive for. And I think that's the point that Mark was making as well, where, it's really about finding the right use cases and the right ways that the technology can be leveraged to improve the efficiency of your business or kind of drive up the demand side, as Mark was mentioning. I think embedding it within the broader business strategy in terms of how you're advancing, how you're adopting technology, how that fits within, the capability of the business as it is today or kind of will be in the future. And oftentimes there's a much simpler and more cost-effective solution that can get you 80% of the way there. And so I think really kind of stacking it up against other options and making sure that it's an enabler and not an outcome by itself is really important.
That's really helpful. Let's pivot a little bit to the future, because we all know technology evolves pretty quickly. Where do we see AI heading? How do we want to make sure that we don't miss out on it? Mark, let me go to you first and then maybe Paul to add.
Sure. So I think that the places where I see it really growing, better predictive analytics. We talked about getting insights out of the data earlier today. And I think that's just going to become better. Like the techniques and the algorithms that underlie this technology will just get better at predicting outcomes using probably increasingly less and less data and just creatively putting that data together without getting to the specifics of it. Natural language processing, I see that as another big area that will get better. More understanding of the nuances. So when you read a sentence, understand the context of that and where there might be some variability that's not captured today, I think that will get better over time. So we'll see tools like ChatGPT or any other kind of large language model, Microsoft Copilot, the full gamut that's out there. We'll start to get better at understanding what you're asking of it, what it's receiving. So you'll start to get better quality data. We'll start to limit hallucinations. That's a big topic today, I'd say, in Gen AI, where, can you really trust that output? And because 80% of the time it's good, and the 20% or 90-10, whatever split, depending on what you're asking of it, that where it gets it wrong, it sounds convincing. And so you have to be really careful about that. And then lastly, from a capabilities perspective, I just say we're seeing more and more around like an AI assistant where an AI is really augmenting you as an individual. And we'll start to see more of that as we build in these platforms that are able to consume the data that we generate in our daily lives and then be able to use that to help us actually operate in our daily lives. And that'll eventually lead to what's maybe on the more hype side of things now, but I'm sure will become real over time, HAI, which is really around that autonomy of an agent that can operate within your company to perform some tasks. And so today we're very much seeing assistant type focused things, and that'll start to move towards being a little bit more autonomous and certainly start with low level type applications and then grow, I think, over time. How well we get there and all the controls that need to be in place, we'll have to come to it. But that's what I see as where the industry's pushing the boundaries there. There's just more personalized recommendations that are coming through, and those are the kind of base use cases we have today. But we'll start to see more and more of that as you interact with any kind of company. They'll start to get a perspective on who you are, what you can bring to the table, how you interact with them, and be able to personalize that interaction a lot more.
Yeah, and Mark, all those are great points. And I think from my perspective, kind of two quick points I think I would make. I think in the short term, we'll see a little bit of convergence on some of the industry provided tools. And, I think when OpenAI brought out ChatGPT, there was a big rush for some of the major technology companies to kind of bring out their own version. I think we'll start to see convergence on some of those tools and capabilities, and we'll start to see some real winners kind of emerge for particular use cases. And so I think that will ultimately introduce a little bit of standardization across the industry in terms of what tools work best for what problems. And so I think in the short term, we'll see that everything that Mark just mentioned about some of the advancements for sure. I think, in terms of not missing out or how best to engage on this at the moment, I think one of the key points here, and Mark touched on this around the hype, is there has been a lot of hype over the last 12 to 18 months. And I think, firms that will be successful at doing this are going to be able to find ways to separate the hype cycle from true ROI and true kind of efficiency gains from deploying AI. And so again, it goes back to the point we were making about, AI in itself not being strategy, but being an enabler of your strategy. And so I think really firms that can hone in on opportunities that drive ROI as opposed to just drive AI technology out there into the world will really kind of be the ones that are kind of best positioned to kind of move things forward.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, gentlemen. Let's transition now to the wrap-up phase. And I'd like to ask each of you to give us your top takeaways from the session. The key things we should take back to our teams. Paul, let's start with you, and then Mark, I'll let you have the final word.
I would say kind of three kind of key things from my perspective. And we touched on each of these throughout the questions here, but really the first being treating AI as an enabler, not a strategy in and of itself, I think is very, very important. And so again, recognizing that it will help in terms of business process and efficiency and change kind of how we work, but it's not by itself going to be the solution to every problem. And so I think recognizing that and building a roadmap around it as opposed to with that as a primary objective is going to be very, very important. The second point I would make, again, kind of back to information and protection and data is really around as you're deploying AI, as businesses are looking at really focusing on information protection and making sure that customer, employee, and sensitive company information are kind of treated very, very carefully as it's interacting with these different AI solutions. Again, recognizing that the underlying machinery and the complexity of the algorithms make it difficult to kind of understand exactly how data is being transferred and moved throughout the system and where it may be picked up. It's still important to try and kind of build the right controls and right risk management protocols around making sure that information is protected. And then the last piece I'll mention is, I think what's worked well for us is to start simple and grow. This is particularly true, I think, with generative AI, maybe less so on the traditional kind of machine learning side of things. But I think when it comes to generative AI, to really look at it as an ongoing journey, looking at iteration, continuous monitoring and measurement of success, testing it on small groups of users before moving to a kind of large scale is very, very important for a couple of reasons, not least of which is understanding how users actually interact with the technology once it's available to them. And so I think this concept of iteration and continued growth is going to be very, very important when it comes to the generative AI. I think on the more traditional side, like, traditional predictive modeling and analytical programs, obviously, can lend themselves to a bit more kind of direct implementation. But on the generative AI front, for sure, I think this test and learn approach is going to be very, very important to understand what's working and what's not.
Thanks, Paul. From my side, say, make sure that you start with the right use case. Think about what might be, again, the best cost saver, best risk mitigant, best revenue opportunities as kind of the demand side in there, and then understand your capability to kind of address that and the risk that you might introduce by addressing that. So use case selection is such an important first one to get right. The second piece, data quality, I mentioned it a few times today because it's so near and dear to me. And having really good high quality data makes all the difference in the world. Make sure you capture that, make sure you've got processes and programs in place to capture that your organization, all the folks who are entering data or however you collect that data is done in a consistent manner, it's reliable, et cetera. And those are going to be good foundations going forward. Once you've built your AI model on the back end, that implementation is such a critical aspect. So don't ignore that piece. Think about that during the build, during the planning phase, really is great. Once you have your signal or the output of the AI model, how are you going to use that? How does that integrate with day-to-day? Are those team members ready to receive that? In what form will they see that? How is that going to impact the process, et cetera, et cetera? So that's such a critical piece for me. And then lastly, AI really is an ongoing journey. It really requires continuous iteration and monitoring. The models will degrade over time. I think that's normal as your environment changes, things change around you. That's going to be critical to just make sure, even if nothing's changed within your company, there's a law or something competitor that's changed, that you just keep a tab of and keep going.
Thank you both. Awesome discussion. Tons of great points to take away. Certainly thinking about who should be around the table has been one that, as we've gone through our journey, has been one that having more people around it, as well as like different perspectives, covering areas like HR, risk, technology, and just some other partners that maybe you hadn't thought about around legal, has been great to certainly make sure that we get the right perspective, but also challenge our perspective really early on to make sure that we have ongoing success.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.